I still remember the exact scent of the room that afternoon. It smelled of expensive white freesias, melting vanilla wax, and the sharp, metallic tang of chilled champagne. We were sitting on the private outdoor terrace of the glasshouse, a venue that charges a non-refundable $4,500 booking fee just for the afternoon. On the long, linen-draped table sat a plate of white truffle rigatoni. It was listed on the menu at exactly $72, and by the time it reached me, it was completely cold. I didn't care about the food, though. My focus was on my 8-year-old son, Leo, who was quietly coloring with a single blue crayon on the back of a paper napkin. He was trying his best to be invisible, sensing the thick, unspoken tension that always followed us into family gatherings. My younger sister, Chloe, sat at the head of the table, surrounded by pastel pink balloons and tiered trays of miniature macarons. She was radiant, wrapped in a designer maternity dress that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. My mother was hovering over her, adjusting her posture, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, and treating her like fragile porcelain. Then, Chloe looked across the table at me. The ambient chatter of 30 guests dropped slightly as she tapped the edge of her crystal glass with a silver fork. "Elena, sweetie," Chloe said, her voice dripping with a practiced, theatrical pity that reached every corner of the patio. "Don't look so stressed by the menu prices. I told the coordinator to put your meal on my registry tab. I know how tight things get when you're doing the whole single mom routine without a partner to share the load. We just want you to feel included, even if this world is a little outside your budget." A few of her friends offered tight, uncomfortable smiles. My mother nodded approvingly, murmuring something about how generous Chloe always was. I felt the heat rise in my collar, but I didn't flinch. I kept my hands flat on the table, looking directly into my sister's eyes. She wanted a reaction. She wanted me to stammer, to apologize, or to leave in tears so she could spend the rest of the evening discussing how emotionally unstable I had become since my divorce. What Chloe didn't realize was that her laughter had an expiration date. And as I looked down at Leo, who had stopped coloring to look up at me with wide, protective eyes, a cold certainty settled over me. That was the exact moment everything shifted. I smiled back at her, took a sip of water, and waited. To understand why Chloe felt so comfortable weaponizing my life against me, you have to understand the dynamic that built our family. For 20 years, I was the quiet anchor. I am a senior forensic auditor, a job that requires me to look at complex financial structures, track hidden assets, and spot deception in columns of numbers that most people find blinding. I fix multi-million-dollar discrepancies for corporations. Yet, in my own family, I was treated as the dull, transactional elder sister who was built to endure. Chloe was the artist, the dreamer, the golden child who could do no wrong. When she wanted to open a luxury floral boutique 3 years ago, our parents didn't have the capital. They came to me. Because I loved my sister and wanted her to succeed, I signed a personal loan agreement for $35,000 to help her secure the commercial lease. The terms were clear. She was to pay me back in quarterly installments of $2,500. To date, I had received exactly 2 payments. Both checks had bounced. Whenever I brought up the outstanding debt, my mother would sigh, rubbing her temples as if my request for basic financial accountability was a form of physical assault. "Elena, you make excellent money at the firm," she would say. "Chloe is building a brand. She's creating an image. Why do you always have to make everything so transactional? Family doesn't keep score." So, I stopped asking. But I didn't stop watching. Over the last 12 months, I watched Chloe's lifestyle detach completely from the reality of her boutique's foot traffic. She started driving a brand new luxury SUV with a $1,200 monthly lease. Her husband, Marcus, a smooth-talking, independent consultant whose actual income source was always vague, suddenly began wearing custom-tailored suits and talking about international real estate investments. My parents were completely blinded by the glitter. They spoke about Marcus as if he were a financial savior, frequently contrasting his grand, sweeping promises with my quiet, predictable life as a divorced mother working a corporate schedule. They didn't see the tiny fractures in the porcelain. But as an auditor, I know that when the surface of a ledger looks too perfect, it's usually because someone spent a lot of time erasing the mistakes. That should have been the end of the background noise, but the true cracks began to show the night before the baby shower. Because the venue was located 2 hours away in the valley, our parents had suggested we all stay the night at the old family cabin, a property that technically belonged to our grandmother's estate, but was currently sitting in a legal limbo that I was personally managing. It was roughly 11:45 p.m. The house was dark, and the mountain air was dead silent. I was sitting at the small kitchen table, the glow of my laptop screen illuminating a spreadsheet of tax returns for a client, when I heard a soft rustling from the hallway. It was Leo. He was holding his stuffed bear, his eyes wide as he pointed toward the heavy glass windows that faced the graveled driveway. "Mom," he whispered, pulling at the sleeve of my sweater. "Auntie Chloe's husband is playing outside in the dark." I frowned, setting my glasses on the table. I walked over to the window and carefully parted the heavy drapes. The moon was high, casting long, sharp shadows across the gravel. Down below, parked near the edge of the tree line where the shadows were deepest, was Marcus's SUV. The rear liftgate was wide open. Marcus was moving with frantic, jerky movements, completely devoid of his usual smooth, arrogant composure. He was hauling large, heavy black duffel bags out of the side door of the cabin and jamming them into the back of the vehicle. He stopped every few seconds, looking back toward the dark windows of the house, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the crisp 45-degree temperature. "Is he packing for a trip?" Leo asked innocently, his voice cutting through the silence of the kitchen. "I don't know, buddy," I murmured, keeping my arm around Leo's shoulder. "Let's get you back to bed." After Leo fell back asleep, I stood by the kitchen window for another hour. Marcus didn't return to the house. Instead, he climbed into the driver's seat, turned off the interior cabin lights, and sat there in the dark, the faint blue glow of his smartphone illuminating his face until nearly 2 a.m. What they didn't know was that my phone buzzed at exactly 2:15 a.m. with an automated alert from my personal credit monitoring service. Someone had just attempted to run a hard inquiry on a joint family asset configuration, an asset that required my explicit, dual signature authorization. The pieces of the puzzle were completely scattered, but as I sat in the dark kitchen, listening to the old house creak, I knew the picture was about to form. And it was going to be devastating. The atmosphere inside the glasshouse private terrace was suffocating. It was exactly 3:45 p.m. when Chloe stood up from her seat at the head of the long linen table. The sun was hitting the pink tulle decorations, creating a soft, artificial glow around her. She tapped her silver fork against her crystal glass a second time, but this time, she didn't stop there. She reached for the small, wireless microphone the venue provided for the registry announcements. "Everyone, if I could have your attention for just a moment," Chloe said, her voice echoing smoothly through the outdoor speakers. Her eyes scanned the room, bypassing our mother, who was beaming with pride, and landed squarely on me. "I want to take a moment to talk about family. We all know how blessed I am to have Marcus, a man who provides a life of absolute security for our future daughter. A man who ensures we never have to compromise on our dreams." She paused, letting the guests murmur their agreement. Marcus sat next to her, adjusting his custom silk tie, offering a tight, rigid smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I noticed his left hand was twitching slightly against his knee. "But today, I also want to acknowledge my sister, Elena," Chloe continued, her tone shifting into that sharp, patronizing sweetness. "Elena has had a difficult road. Being a single mother, living on a strict corporate budget, managing a small apartment alone, it takes a certain kind of survival. I know she looks at this beautiful shower, these gifts, and this venue, and it must feel like a completely different world. But Elena, I want you to know that you don't have to feel bitter or left out. My husband and I are more than willing to give you our old living room furniture next month when our new custom Italian set arrives. We believe in helping those who can't help themselves. A collective, awkward hush fell over the terrace. A few of Chloe's wealthy friends looked down at their plates, clearly embarrassed by the sheer cruelty of the public display. My mother merely smiled, adjusting a pink ribbon on a gift box. I sat perfectly still, my fingers lightly touching the edge of my cold, $72 pasta plate.
I didn't yell.
I didn't cry. I simply looked at Chloe, registering the small, triumphant smirk on her face. She thought she had won. She thought she had permanently established her position as the successful, benevolent golden child while reducing me to a charity case in front of 30 people. Then the small hand next to me moved. Leo dropped his blue crayon. He stood up from his chair, his 8-year-old frame small but entirely resolute. Before I could pull him back, he looked directly at Chloe, his voice clear, innocent, and entirely unbrained by adult pretense. "Auntie Chloe?" Leo called out, his voice carrying perfectly across the silent terrace. Chloe blinked, her smirk faltering slightly as she lowered the microphone a few inches. "Yes, Leo, sweetie?" "If everything is so perfect and you have so much money," Leo asked, his big brown eyes blinking with genuine curiosity, "why was your husband secretly packing all those heavy black bags into his car in the dark last night? And why was he crying in the driver's seat while you were asleep?" The silence that followed was absolute. The soft breeze from the valley was the only sound left on the terrace. The microphone in Chloe's hand picked up the sudden, ragged catch in her own breath, amplifying it through the speakers. Marcus froze. The rigid smile on his face instantly vanished, replaced by a gray, sickly pallor. He stood up so fast his heavy wooden chair scraped violently against the stone tile, making a loud, screeching sound that made several guests flinch. "He's just a child," Marcus stammered, his voice cracking as he looked around a room at the widening eyes of his business associates. He doesn't know what he's talking about. I was just moving some golf clubs." "They weren't golf clubs, Uncle Marcus," Leo added, entirely unfazed. "They were big plastic sacks with zippers. You locked them in the trunk and didn't come back inside." Chloe turned slowly to face her husband, her face turning an ash-white color that completely ruined her radiant, pastel-pink presentation. "Marcus? What is he talking about?" That was the moment the illusion died. And that was the exact moment I realized my sister's beautiful, expensive world wasn't just cracking, it was about to completely implode. We left the venue 20 minutes later amidst a flurry of whispered excuses and half-finished mimosas. I didn't say a word to Chloe or my mother as I buckled Leo into his car seat and drove back to my apartment. I didn't need to. As a forensic auditor, I don't deal in emotional confrontations, I deal in documentation. The moment I reached my home office, I opened my laptop and pulled up the automated credit alert that had pinged my phone at 2:15 a.m. the night before. The inquiry wasn't an accident. Marcus had attempted to access the equity lines tied to our grandmother's estate, a historic mountain property valued at approximately $450,000, because our grandmother had passed away without a finalized.
Marcus had tried to bypass me.
He had used a digital notary service to submit an emergency loan application, listing my name as a co-signer and using a forged digital authorization code. I spent the next 4 hours doing what I do best, auditing. I pulled up public corporate registries, tax lien databases, and court filing schedules. Because Marcus's independent consulting firm was registered as a limited liability company in our state, his basic legal filings were public record if you knew exactly where to look. What I found was a financial horror story. Chloe's luxury floral boutique wasn't just struggling, it had been operating at a net loss of $8,500 per month for the last 2 years. The high-end foot traffic she bragged about didn't exist. To keep the doors open and maintain the appearance of a wealthy socialite, Chloe had been feeding the business with cash advances from personal credit cards. But Marcus was the real catastrophe. 3 weeks prior, a major civil judgment had been entered against his consulting firm in another county. He had taken a $180,000 upfront retainer from a local commercial developer for a zoning project, completely failed to deliver, and spent the entire sum on personal expenses, including the luxury SUV lease, his custom suits, and the non-refundable $4,500 booking fee for Chloe's baby shower. The developer had filed an emergency asset freeze. Marcus had exactly 48 hours to return the $180,000 before a formal referral for grand larceny was submitted to the state prosecutor's office. He was entirely broke. The black duffel bags Leo saw him packing in the dark weren't golf clubs. They were his clothing, his personal papers, and whatever high-end valuables he could strip from their rented home before the legal hammer fell. He wasn't planning a beautiful future with his new daughter. He was planning a midnight run to a non-extradition jurisdiction. And the most terrifying part? The forged loan document he had submitted at 2:15 a.m. was an attempt to pull $200,000 out of our family's estate trust to cover his debt, leaving me legally and financially responsible for the fraudulent liability. I looked at the digital ledger on my screen, the cold blue light reflecting off my glasses. I felt no anger. I felt no desire to scream or call my mother to say, "I told you so." I simply felt the immense, heavy power of absolute certainty. Chloe had spent years treating me like an invisible, incompetent failure. Now, her entire survival depended on a system she didn't realize I controlled completely. At 8:30 a.m. on Monday morning, I didn't call the family. I called my firm's senior legal counsel and the compliance officer at the state banking authority. As an auditor, I know that speed and documentation are the only things that matter when a fraud is actively occurring. I filed a formal affidavit of non-authorization with the lending institution Marcus had targeted, explicitly stating that my signature had been forged and that the joint family asset configuration was frozen due to attempted identity theft. By 10:15 a.m., the bank had issued a formal administrative hold on the transaction. The $200,000 Marcus was desperately waiting for to save himself from criminal charges was permanently locked in the digital vault. Next, I drafted a single comprehensive legal notice. It was a formal demand for payment regarding the $35,000 personal loan I had given Chloe 3 years ago to open her boutique. I attached copies of the 2 bounce checks from her account, the original signed agreement, and a certified statement of the outstanding interest, which had now brought the total balance to exactly $41,250. I gave her 48 hours to clear the debt in full, or I would file a public petition for involuntary business liquidation in the county court. I didn't send these documents via text message or email. I hired a professional, bonded process server to deliver them directly to Chloe's boutique at noon, right when she usually had her highest volume of walk-in clients. At 3:14 p.m., my phone began to vibrate on my desk. It was my mother. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. 10 minutes later, Chloe called. I let that go to voicemail too. Then came a barrage of frantic text messages from my mother. "Elena, what are you doing?" "Chloe is in hysterics. Marcus says there's been a massive mistake with the bank. You're going to ruin her pregnancy. Call me right now." I waited until exactly 5 p.m., the official end of my business day, before I finally picked up the phone. I didn't raise my voice. I kept my tone perfectly level, the exact same tone I use when delivering an adverse audit report to a corporate board of directors. "Hello, Mother," I said calmly. "Elena." Her voice came through the speaker, high-pitched, chaotic, and laced with panic. "How can you do this? The bank has frozen the estate trust, and Chloe just received a legal summons at her shop. Marcus says you're blocking an emergency investment that could save his firm. Your sister is hyperventilating." "Marcus didn't find an investment, Mother," I replied, my voice smooth and unhurried. "Marcus forged my signature on a fraudulent $200,000 loan application against Grandma's property to avoid going to state prison for grand larceny. And Chloe owes me over $41,000 that she has spent 3 years refusing to pay while publicly mocking my income." There was a sudden, violent gasp on the other end of the line. I could hear Chloe crying in the background, her voice muffled but distinct. Tell her she is to lift the hold. Marcus needs that money by tomorrow morning, or they're going to file the charges. Elena, my mother pleaded, her usual arrogant composure completely gone. We're family. We can settle this quietly. Just let the loan go through this once, and Marcus will pay it back immediately. We can't have him arrested. Think about the scandal. Think about what people will say at the country club. Family doesn't keep score, Mother, I said, repeating her own words back to her with a quiet, devastating precision. That's what you told me every time I asked for my money back. Well, I'm not keeping score anymore. I'm simply enforcing the law. The hold stays, the demand stands, and if Marcus enters that cabin property again, the local sheriff will be waiting for him with a trespass warrant. I didn't wait for her response. I hung up the phone, placed it face down on my desk, and turned around to look at Leo, who was happily building a castle with his Lego blocks on the living room floor. For the first time in years, the air in my home felt completely light. The fallout was swift, legal, and entirely institutional. Marcus never got his hands on the $200,000 from the family trust. Without the funds to satisfy the civil judgment or return the developer's retainer, his firm was hit with a formal criminal complaint for grand larceny and wire fraud. Within 3 weeks, 2 investigators from the Financial Crimes Division arrived at his rented home. By the end of the month, his luxury SUV was quietly repossessed from the driveway, and he was forced to sign a stipulated confession of judgment, permanently ruining his financial standing and ensuring a permanent paper trail of his fraud. Chloe's boutique didn't survive the liquidation petition. When my legal counsel presented the undeniable evidence of her bounce checks, continuous non-payment, and insolvent bank statements to the county judge, her business assets were placed into a temporary receivership to satisfy the $41,250 debt. The expensive imported floral arrangements, the custom glass display cases, and the pink neon signs she loved so much were auctioned off to the highest bidder on a rainy Tuesday morning. I didn't even attend the auction. I simply received the electronic receipt from the court trustee. My parents were forced to face the harsh reality that the glittering, wealthy lifestyle they had worshipped for years was nothing more than a house of cards built on my stolen security. They had to sell their own secondary vehicle just to cover Chloe's immediate medical fees and legal expenses during her 3rd trimester. The grand narratives about Marcus's international investments vanished overnight, replaced by a quiet, humiliated withdrawal from their social circles at the country club. They stopped hosting Sunday dinners. The loud, arrogant family chat group we all shared went completely silent. They tried to reach out to me several times over the following months, offering small, tentative apologies via text and inviting me to quiet dinners where they promised the past would never be mentioned. But I didn't go. I didn't need their half-hearted validation anymore, and I certainly didn't need their permission to be seen. I had spent a lifetime trying to earn a place at a table that was actively designed to keep me under their thumb. One evening, about 6 months after the baby shower, I was sitting on the balcony of my new apartment. It wasn't a glass house, but it had a beautiful, clear view of the city lights and a small garden box where Leo was growing real mint plants. The air was cool, smelling of fresh rain and clean linen. My phone buzzed with a final notification from my legal team. The liquidation process was officially complete. The full amount of Chloe's debt had been successfully recovered from her business assets and deposited directly into my personal investment account. The estate trust was now legally secure, permanently locked away in a private wealth structure where no one could ever touch it without my verified biometric approval and 2-factor corporate authentication. Leo walked out onto the balcony, holding a small plate of chocolate chip cookies we had baked together. He handed one to me, his small face bright with that pure, uncomplicated happiness that only a protected child can have. He wasn't walking on eggshells anymore. He wasn't trying to be invisible. "Mom," he said, looking out at the city lights. "It's really quiet here. I like it." "Me too, buddy," I murmured, pulling him close against my side and kissing the top of his head. It's exactly how it's supposed to be. As I watched the traffic move smoothly down below, I realized that true strength doesn't require a microphone, a luxury label, or a loud public display to prove its existence. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply stand your ground, keep your ledger clean, and let the truth do the heavy lifting for you. Silence isn't weakness. When backed by documentation, it is the ultimate leverage. If you've ever been underestimated, minimized, or pushed aside by the people who were supposed to protect you, I hope you remember that their opinion of you is never the reality of who you are. Your worth isn't determined by their ability to see it. It's determined by your own quiet resilience, your boundaries, and your willingness to finally choose yourself. Thank you for listening tonight. If this story brought you comfort or reminded you of your own hidden strength, please let me know in the comments below where you're listening from. Take care of yourselves, set your boundaries firmly, and I'll see you in the next story.